What's Your Work Fit is sponsored by Hudson Davis. Start your brand's marketing and communications journey today at hudsondaviscommunications.com. I'm Dan Smolin. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit? So that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day, everyone. Dan Smolin from What's Your Work Fit. I hope you're having a good and successful day today. I'm really excited about our live show. We have a great guest, great topic coming along. But before we get to that, a couple of things. First of all, I want to wish you all happy meteorological spring. That comes on Friday. We didn't have much of a winter. How about that global warming? But more importantly, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you, to offer my gratitude for helping us build What's Your Work Fit into a real thing, into a thriving community that grows by the week. We serve people like you, people who are career professionals, perhaps entrepreneurs, who are trying to make work a wonderful part of the day, doing many wonderful things, and not the all-consuming time suck of a day. We do this by promoting our episodes on our social media channels. We are on LinkedIn. We are on Facebook Live. We're also on the What's Your Work Fit YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the platform of your choice. Here on the screen, you can see the buttons that you need to respond to on the platform of your choice. Easy to do. And there's one other ask, and that is if you are already following us, if you already are part of our community, I ask that you tell 5 friends to do the same, to subscribe to What's Your Work Fit. If each of us gets 5 of our friends and close colleagues to subscribe, we're going to build a truly formidable community of career professionals who are purposed to make their work fit their dreams and their aspirations. Okay. It is my great pleasure to introduce our guest today. He is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. How you doing, Gleb?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on.
It is my pleasure and my honor. Gleb is a behavioral scientist, acclaimed as a quote-unquote office whisperer by the New York Times, and he helps leaders to use hybrid work to improve their retention and productivity while cutting costs. It's a great gig you got there.
Thank you. Well timed.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce our co-hosts on What's Your Work Fit in the Workplace. First off, Mark Gilbreth. Mark is CEO and founder of Liquid Space. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing great. Gleb, how did it take us so long to be in the same digital room? Good to be with you today.
Not sure, but I'm glad we're here.
And of course, Fran Saley. Hey, Fran. Fran is a prolific poster of knowledge on future of work and workplace on LinkedIn. If you're not already following him, you got to do it. How you doing, Fran?
I'm fine, Dan. Thank you. That descriptor gets different every week. It's always interesting to know what you're going to say about me. And nice to be with you, Gleb.
Nice to see you again, friend. We had lunch not too long ago, so it was fun.
Yeah, indeed.
So we 3 are really dying to ask you this burning question, which is, can creativity flourish in a distributed workplace? Take us through your thinking on this, Gleb.
Sure, happy to. Now, there are a number of leaders who are specifically asking their teams to come to the office because they are concerned about creativity, innovation. So you probably heard people like Sam Altman talk about how, hey, startups can't start up in a remote setting because people need to be together in order to innovate. Others talk about brainstorming, how brainstorming is critically important, and in order to brainstorm, you need to be in the same room. So therefore, it's really important to be in the same room for innovation and creativity. What really the situation is, they just don't know how to do creativity right in a distributed setting. That is key. I've worked with a number of large companies like Applied Materials and others to ensure they have good creativity, even when their teams are distributed, sometimes when they're in the office, sometimes when they're working from home, in order to have the kind of outcomes of creativity and innovation that are very desirable for folks. So let's talk about what that how do you actually get creativity innovation in a distributed setting. I'll talk about two specific techniques. One very old school and one very new school. So, old school. So, you've talked about brainstorming. You've heard brainstorming. It's when people get together in a room and you just shoot ideas at each other and you produce brilliant stuff, right? There's a lot of benefits to brainstorming that research shows. And this is kind of my background research, looking at what the actual research actually shows. So, one of the benefits is synergy, where you have an idea was inspired by someone else. In other words, if you were not with those people, if you didn't hear their ideas, you would not be inspired. Then another benefit is social facilitation, where you get motivated. So one is inspiration, one where your idea is prompted by their idea. Another is just the excitement of being in the room with other people, talking about topics, and that's fun. And that's engaging, motivating. So that helps create ideas. However, there are a number of problems with traditional brainstorming. One is called production blocking. Production blocking is when you have an idea, but other people are talking about a different idea. And so then you don't have a chance to break in, and then you drop your idea and you lose track of it. That's especially problematic for people who are introverted. And we talked a little bit about introverts before the show, so maybe we can bring that up later. So introverted and people who are junior, who have lower power, which makes it harder for both introverts and junior people to interrupt. Then you have what's called evaluation apprehension. That's a fear of being judged by others. When you have an idea that seems too out of the box, or maybe that politically criticizes someone else, you have evaluation apprehension. And so that is a problem for people who are pessimistic, and again, people who are junior. And you also have social loafing, which is the more people you have in the room, the lazier our brain tends to become to create ideas. Now, already in the early 1990s, these problems were known, and Harvard came up with a technique called asynchronous brainstorming, where people were separately brainstorming ideas to address them. And I adapted this technique to the virtual setting. I have an article in Harvard Business Review about virtual asynchronous brainstorm. So here's how it works. The first step is that you choose a digital platform in which you can input your inputs, like Google Forms, or perhaps Mural if you want visual forms, or Microsoft Forms if you're a Microsoft shop. So I have a number of those. Then you put your ideas into that form. So everyone on the team, let's say there's 6 people, takes their time, an hour, a week, 15 minutes, whatever it is, to input their ideas into this form. That addresses the production blocking. So no one is blocked from creating their ideas and putting them into the form. That is very helpful. Then you also want to make that anonymous. You can make it anonymous so that it's only the facilitator can access the information, or who put the information in, or no one can access it. So for Google Forms, you can just put a field for name and a field for idea. And then you strip away the names when you share the ideas. So now let's say you have 6 people. They put in 10 ideas each. There are going to be, let's say, 60 ideas, 10 of them are duplicative, so you remove those as the facilitator, and you send a sheet with 50 ideas that's anonymized to everyone. And then they comment on them and evaluate them on categories that, let's say, how exciting, how practical, how innovative, how valuable it is, whatever categories you want to use. Let's say we say exciting, innovative, and valuable. So now each person rates on a scale of 0 to 10 on these ideas. So each of these 50 ideas now has a score from 0 to 10, altogether 0 to 30, for 6 people, which is 30 times 6 is 180. So now you have ideas from 0 to 180 scored, plus comments. And then the last step is having a meeting where you choose only the ideas that float to the top. Let's say ideas that got 160 and above. And so now, no matter if they came from the most junior person on the team or from the team leader, you don't know. You evaluate those ideas, and then you just discuss the ideas and how to implement them effectively. And so then you edit those. So the first 2 steps are very well done from home. You can also do them from the office. The last step is done synchronously, whether virtually or in person. I recommend teams that are hybrid do it in person. Teams that are virtual, of course, can do it fully remotely. And that's the step where you just discuss the ideas and how to implement them. And the nice thing is you don't lose track of all of those other ideas because you put them in the idea bank. They might not be practical now, but they'll be practical later, and you don't have to do this work all over again. And so this technique has been shown to create more ideas and more novel ideas than traditional brainstorming, according to peer review by external evaluators. So I'm going to stop here. This is a traditional technique, and I will talk later about using digital AI, digital techniques, specifically generative AI, as a new school technique for innovation. But I'm going to stop and see what kind of questions you have about virtually synchronous brainstorming.
Fran?
I don't have a question about that, but I do have a kind of a side related question. In addition to creativity and innovation, you've written a lot recently, Gleb, about productivity. And I recall recently an article, I think it was in Fortune, where you talked about how remote work had actually recently surpassed the levels of in-office work. And you gave some specific reasons for that. And I thought that would be an interesting thing to be discussing here, in that for a long time, we've heard the CEOs and the other C-suite folks talk about productivity. You can't get it unless you bring people together. I think your data was pretty convincing that that is not really true based on some objective data. Is that something you could address here?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, we have extensive research showing that hybrid work is more productive than in-office work. There's no question. We can talk about fully remote, and there's some differences depending on demographics. But hybrid work, no question, it's more productive than in-person work. So I'll tell you about a couple of studies. One study looked at a major travel agency called Trip.com. So Trip.com, it's a 35,000 people travel agency. They assigned staff in their airfare and IT division. Half of their staff work full-time in the office, and half of their staff work in a hybrid modality. So hybrid modality was I think that was 3 days. So what they did was they have those staff with even-numbered birthdays working in the office full-time, and staff with odd-numbered birthdays working in a hybrid modality. So completely random assignment. And what they did is they evaluated who was more productive over 6 months. And they used 2 metrics. One was manager evaluation of performance, and another was lines of code written or programs. And they found that managers didn't see any difference in performance between these two groups. So they had the same evaluation of performance. But the hybrid group had over 4% lines of code written. So they clearly, actually, on objective metrics, performed better. More than that, they also had 33% better retention over that period of time, over those 6 months, which is, again, great. You see that. Now, workers had higher levels of satisfaction in the hybrid group, but managers had lower levels of satisfaction. And that's likely tied to the fact that they didn't see this improvement in performance because they weren't trained on how to manage the hybrid setting, and they didn't know how to assess performance effectively. That was a serious issue. So that is a big, big problem when people are not trained, and that's a major reason why managers don't evaluate hybrid work as more productive, which there's extensive research showing it is. Now, going on to fully remote work, we have some conflicting data where we find in studies that if you are an hourly contract worker for a short-term time period, there was a study on an Indian firm which gave people data input tasks for 6 weeks, so contract or low-skilled labor for 6 weeks. The people who were assigned to work from home did worse in terms of productivity than people who were full-time in the office. Those were the two categories they were looking at. By contrast, there was a study of economists working in the Fed, and what they found is, and that was during the pandemic shutdowns, they found that having that change, people working remotely were 24% more productive. So these are highly paid, skilled professionals with a long-term future. They weren't hourly paid employees. So that the implication there is that if you are a professional with a long-term career, future salaried, well skilled, that you're going to be more productive working remotely, full-time or part-time, meaning hybrid. But if you're a low-paid contract worker, you will not necessarily, or likely you will be hourly worker, you will likely perform worse if you're working full-time remotely. However, in hybrid work, there's extensive research. I just cited one study. I can go into a number of others, which show that hybrid work is more productive in all sorts of cases than in office work.
So bottom line, there's a building level of documentation to support to dispel some of the notions that existed in the early pandemic period about productivity and being together, which seem to be less more quiet in that arena than they have been in the past. And this is probably why.
This is probably why. We also have not simply those productivity outcomes, we have financial outcomes. So there was a study from Pittsburgh University looking at companies in the S&P 500 which announced return to office mandates. And the study looked at what was the financial consequences for the companies of doing so. And the study found that the companies did not have any financial benefits, looking at their financial performance. They didn't have any financial benefits from announcing a return to office. So no financial benefits. But what they did find was that the companies had a much lower employee engagement that announced return to office. In fact, about half hour before the show, I was talking to a major financial institution which announced the return to office just a very short time ago. And they were telling me how they had a lot of trouble with their employees. Their engagement scores dropped very seriously after they announced the return to office, and now they're doing it there several months in, less than that. So that's an example. They might not have lower financial performance or higher financial performance, but they definitely have lower engagement scores. And so what we also find is that the reasons for why CEOs announce return to office. According to that study, what the study found was that CEOs were very likely to announce the return to office shortly after bad financial results by the company, showing that they were trying to blame remote work and hybrid work for poor financial performance,
Right.
and just blame that, even though very clear research shows that there's no improvement in financial performance from announcing a return to office. They were using that as a blame.
Sure.
And the study also found that CEOs who were more powerful were more likely to announce return to office, and evaluated more powerful CEOs by the gap between the salary between the CEO and the next highest paid executive. The more power-hungry authoritarian CEOs had a higher gap. And so they found that those CEOs with a higher gap were more likely to announce return to office.
Mark?
So many threads to pull on, Gleb. With the companies that you're working with or speaking to with regards to hybrid, how do you guide them to consider how they set the cadences of gathering or coming back together? And in particular, picking up on your earlier comment about the diversity that exists across employees. stylistic, behaviorally, seniority level. How do you advise companies, or how might companies factor in that individuality that exists? The new college hire that might have been 3 months into a role, that might be on the same team besides somebody that's been in the role for 10 years.
Mhm.
So, the cadences of hybrid. How?
Yeah. We find very clearly when I look at the research and with my clients, so external research, my clients find that the best result is a team-led model. Not having the CEO set, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, or whatever it is, coming to the office, and not having individual employees make the decision by themselves when to come to the office, but having a team come together and work out what works best for them on when to come to the office. And it kind of makes sense, right? When you think about, okay, different teams have different needs. If you have a sales team, they probably want to spend more time in the office overall because they're energized by each other's presence, especially if they need to make outbound calls. It can be difficult. So they probably want to spend more time in the office, though from what I've seen, that's within my clients. If you have a team of programmers, they might want to get together and at the start of the sprint and at the end of the sprint. And depending on how long the sprint is, so that's a couple of days at the beginning. Usually it's 2 weeks, a couple of days at the beginning of 2 weeks, and then maybe a day at the end of the 2 week period. So that's for engineers. If you're accountants, you probably want to come together for a couple of days at the end of a month to close the books, but the rest of the month you might not want to come in at all, and come in for like a week at the end of a quarter and 2 weeks at the end of the year. So if that's kind of accounting team. And you also want to think about how experienced the team is. The more people you have on the team who are junior and who are just learning, the more you want them to come to the office, and you want at least one senior person to come to the office to provide them with mentoring and guidance. And so you want to coordinate on that. And again, the more senior people there are, less need to come to the office because they already have the network, they already have the know-how and the networks they need to work effectively when they're spending time remotely. Now, you also want to make sure that people are coming in for the right reasons. When we look at the reasons for people to come in, you don't need to come to the office to sit on a Zoom calls or day. That's just a waste of your time to do. There's no reason to do that. And you're distracting everyone. One of the biggest complaints I hear from people who are coming to the office is how noisy everyone's sitting and on video conference calls, doing phone calls. People aren't used to that after such a long time in the pandemic, and it's just very uncomfortable for many people. So do your Zoom conference calls from home, do your phone calls from home. You don't need to come to the office to do asynchronous communication, to email, Slack messages, Microsoft Teams. And for lots of professionals, that takes up tons of time. You also don't need to come to the office to do head-down focused work, ranging from programming to analysis to writing, working on your spreadsheets, whatever it might be. You want to come to the office to work in collaborative activities. So collaboration with others, more intense forms of collaboration that's better to do in the office than through virtual conferences, so video conferences. Things like decision-making meetings, where it's important to see nuance and body language, discussion of strategy, that's helpful. Then one-on-one meetings that are more nuanced, potentially rife with conflict, like conflict resolution conversations, performance evaluation conversations, conversations with emotional needs. Then for socializing and team bonding, for the vast majority of people, large majority of people, that's better to do in the office. And then mentoring on the job training in the early stages when you're still building up those muscles and relationships, it's better to do in the office. So those are the things that you want to do in the office. And if you think about who should make that decision, of course, people who are closest to the decisions, the team, working together to make a consensus and figuring out what is going to be a good pattern for them to come to the office and having a team-level guideline on how we work together, how we communicate, how we collaborate, including on how we come when we come to the office and for what purpose.
Gleb, at that team level, which you made a very clear argument for that's the level of management at which these rhythms or cadences of hybrid work really need to be formed. What are you seeing as the most typical team level management readiness or capability gaps in terms of making hybrid work effectively?
So team managers are not even trained in this concept of having to make a decision and guiding people on their team fully building up a team level agreement on what to do. A couple of days ago, I did train the trainer workshop for day long workshop for a major government agency on having their HR staff train managers. And it's just starts from the beginning. How do you actually create this team level template? What kind of conversations do you have? How do you make these decisions? Managers don't know that. They haven't been trained in that. They're much more comfortable with the typical management by walking around style and seeing who's working. So from that, the next point that they need to know, not simply having those discussions and making those decisions to have that guidance, but how do you evaluate people's performance when they're working remotely? That is a fundamental goal of managers, and they don't know how to do that. And we can talk about how to do it, but you asked about the gaps. So knowing how to evaluate people's performance when they're working remotely is very important. A next gap is coordination. I have so many managers complain to me that, hey, when people are working remotely, they miss deadlines, they get their projects late, they don't do the right things. And when I talk to them about how are you coordinating with them to make sure it doesn't happen, they're not really coordinating except that once a week meeting for their team. And they are used to and comfortable with in the office coming over to someone and chatting to them and coordinating, but they don't have a good way of doing that when they're working remotely, and they don't necessarily have the digital skills, technical know-how, and norms and expectations set up about doing that. So maybe they're using emails, and then they're getting an email back in like 2 days, and by that time, and they need to have an email exchange. As a result, the project is late. So they're like, no, let's just go back to the office. I know how to do it in the office. And there's many ways to do it, to coordinate effectively when you're working from home, but that is big gap. And another area that's a big gap is using new tools like generative AI. So I'm going to go back to something we started this conversation with, which is how do you make sure that you're creative, innovative when you're working remotely. So I talked about a new school method. Generative AI is a very effective tool for people working remotely to innovate, be creative, and managers don't know that. I'll give you an example. So let's say you want to brainstorm, and you don't have other people around, you don't have this virtually synchronous brainstorming. A great tool to use is generative AI to brainstorm. Now, generative AI is not very good for things that you need 100% accuracy on, but it's great for creativity and innovation. It beats most people in tests of creativity and innovation, scores the highest, 90-ish% for creativity and innovation. So some of the stuff that it comes up with might not be helpful, but it comes up with a lot of very useful ideas. So let's say you're an engineer and you're thinking about a new product, a new feature. I was actually working on that with a tech company, helping them do this. So you had an engineer, you're thinking about a new feature that you want to introduce. So then you work with generative AI to have it take on the role of generation of ideas. The brainstorm, you need to know how to use prompting effectively to generate a bunch of features and narrow it down and come up down to, okay, here is the feature that I think I really want to introduce, which would have previously taken work with a team of people to do that from a company. Okay, so you come up with a feature. Now you can test it. You don't need a focus group to test it. You can have generative AI take on the role of users, so create user personas and take on that role and give you feedback on that feature. What do you think of it? And so you take that feedback, you revise the feature. Then you revise the feature with that feedback and you create marketing content. So you create marketing for the feature using, again, generative AI. And finally, taking that marketing, and again, brainstorming, creativity, and finally taking all of these, the feedback from the feature, the focus group, the marketing, you create a business plan and a business case for the feature. And
Gleb,
that stage is when you bring it to your team, when you have everything put together, everything created, and then you could work to improve that. But you have saved so much time and so much effort, and you are much more creative and innovative because you're using generative AI for creativity and innovation. And many managers just don't know how to do that. They don't know how to use generative AI for that or many other purposes which facilitate remote.
Gleb, there's
just some areas that I would say.
There's a thread that I'm seeing throughout this conversation and the wisdom that you're sharing. It strikes me that really you are writing, others are writing new playbooks for how hybrid work works.
Mhm.
Team managers need playbooks for how to form team agreements. Individuals and managers need playbooks to think about how to integrate Gen AI into creativity and brainstorming. Does it resonate with you? Would you concur? And will there be a Gleb authored master playbook for how to make hybrid work? Or perhaps that's in your many books. Yeah.
You can get it on Amazon. It's called Returning to the Office and Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams. It's my book on returning to the office and leading hybrid and remote teams, which talks about all of this stuff. And it's kept updated. So I updated it very recently to include generative AI techniques. So it's definitely ready. Check it out on Amazon, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. There's an audiobook version for people who enjoy audiobooks. There's a physical version, and there's a Kindle version.
So Gleb, writing on Mark's comment about team agreements, that was like the real-time discussion of last fall. And also to his point, the real-time discussion of March 2024 has been generative AI and how do we apply it in the workplace? Absolutely. I mean, it is every offline conversation I'm having. I want to go to the poll that you recently did on LinkedIn, and this was really interesting. You asked you got a pretty good response here, and nearly 2 out of every 3 people that responded said that generative AI tools will lead to more remote work.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if you could talk to the opportunities of this and how does that happen in a positive way, and perhaps getting to a question that I had offline about tools like Slack. Are there plug-in aspects of plug-in applications in some of the communications tools that we have for a distributed workforce that would lend themselves well to the generative AI tools out there to foster both individual and group ideation? What are your thoughts?
Sure. So I walked through generative AI as a tool for innovation and creativity. So that's a really great way that you can use generative AI. And that speaks to the concern that a lot of leaders have and had about coming to the office. They think that you can't have ideas without people bumping each other, and so those spontaneous ideas, which again you can have
Mhm.
using generative AI. They think you can't brainstorm without people being in the same room and shooting ideas off each other. You can brainstorm using generative AI. You can also use virtual asynchronous brainstorming, or what I like most is a combination of both. So you can use generative AI for innovation and creativity. That is very valuable. Now,
Mm.
you can also use generative AI for other areas. So one of the biggest areas is getting information. So if you train your generative AI on internal company data, which you can use with Copilot, Microsoft's Copilot, and other tools, open source tools, so you don't have to worry about things like your data slipping for some reason into OpenAI's training platform. You can train generative AI in your data, internal company data, and then it makes it so easy to access the data. So you have access to all emails, to all internal company documents, spreadsheets, databases. Previously, you would have had to go to Bob, who was in the company for 35 years, and ask him a question. And it's definitely more awkward to do that when you're not in the office, when you have to schedule a meeting with Bob, or especially Bob is an older fellow and has difficulty using Slack and other chat features. Now, with this tool, you don't have to ask Bob. You can ask Copilot, your local Copilot, which has been trained on your data, Copilot or whatever else, other generative AI tools for information. And so you can extract information much more quickly and effectively. And so that is another area where generative AI is replacing a lot of things that you needed to do in the office. And of course, generative AI is making collaboration easier. So I can go into a video conference meeting and summarize it for you, send you next steps and tasks. And so maybe you don't need to be in a meeting that previously you would have needed to be in the room to do. So you can save your time for other things. So summarization and saving time in collaboration is another use of generative AI. So clearly, there are a number of areas where remote work is made easier by generative AI. And that implies that, yes, that there will be likely more remote work in the future because it's made easier by generative AI. And most people, when they stand in the way of technology, don't really succeed. So if generative AI, indeed, what it looks like, will make remote work easier, then it's going to increase the amount of remote work. And we do see that, especially newer companies, the newer a company is, the more likely it is to have more of its people working more time remotely, because it's more effectively integrated with AI, and also just freer of the old school management by walking around mind style. So that's what I see about generative AI. The concern that some people would have, and I certainly see that, is that generative AI is going to displace some jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is it going to displace more jobs of people who are still working remotely more, people who are working in the office more? It's likely going to displace more people if you're not coming to the office at all. So hybrid people are probably going to be in the best spot to not be displaced by generative AI. But regardless of that, if you know how to use generative AI effectively, I think you can certainly successfully work full time remotely for the next while until we have singularity, but we don't know when that will
Right.
happen and if it will happen. In short, that I think that generative AI is definitely a tool that will facilitate more remote work. It will also facilitate more displacement of workers.
I came out of database marketing, and it was always the axiom: garbage in, garbage out. And so if you didn't have good data to rely on, the output that you got reflected that. What has been interesting to me, Gleb, and I'm eager for your insight, is just in the matter of a few weeks, I've seen the results that generative AI tools are capable of has increased almost exponentially. I did one of my first open AI searches back in the fall, and I was like, I could have done a Google search faster. And then I went on, I'll just mention a name. This is an app that's on the Apple platform called Perplexity. And I went on that just to help me with some research for What's Your Work Fit. And I was astonished at how well it pulled together accurate data in a cohesive narrative that I didn't have to write. I'm a writer. I don't mind writing, but it did all this in a fraction of a few seconds, fractional time in a matter of a few seconds. What are your thoughts on that? And are you also seeing the week by week improvement of these tools?
Absolutely. We recently had the release of Gemini with Gemini Pro 1.5, which looks very good. And we definitely will see, and there's some issues that have to do with Google's policy and content moderation. But that aside, the quality of it is really good. And it's probably about the level of ChatGPT 4, the paid version. And we'll see what will happen with ChatGPT 5, which OpenAI is working on. It is very good, very high quality. And the crucial thing we need to realize is that we are right now in the worst that we will ever see generative AI. So generative AI
what do you mean by
is the worst it will ever be. It will only get better from now.
Oh, okay.
So
Gotcha.
it was exactly. It's only going to get better from now. And so what you've seen comparing your first experience and your second experience, in a few months, it'll probably make that same jump again. And in another few months, it'll make that same jump again. Because you can see the number of efforts and investment that are being put into generative AI right now. I mean, Sam Altman is trying to raise millions, if not trillions, if not billions, of like so much money for chips, and there's so much money being flowing into it. There's no question. I mean, NVIDIA has become the third most valuable company, rocketing up on the strength of generative AI because stock market analysts know that there's so much demand for AI chips. Just because of the investment, it's just going to get so much better from now.
NVIDIA is a wonderful example. A year ago, it was a $1 trillion company. As of March 2024, it is a $2 trillion company. That is astonishing scale. Astonishing.
Absolutely.
Fran?
Yeah, if you could cash out a little bit, that would be a smart move, I think.
Might be.
I'm sure there's some billionaires floating around there. Anyway, Gleb, earlier you briefly touched on the introvert extrovert situation, and I know you said you'd done some research there yesterday in the Wall Street
Yes.
Journal, which I did publish on LinkedIn if anybody wants to see it. A story that headlined "Why Introverted Leaders Are Ideal for Post-Pandemic Workplace." And it lists 5 reasons why that is the case. Now, I think the common knowledge is that of the total population, about 40% of people are introverts and the balance are extroverts. And this article is actually written about an extrovert who felt sad about the fact that introverts were so much favored in this new workplace that we're going into. And he has 5 specific factors or criteria why that makes sense. But I'd like to get your, being an extrovert, it's kind of tough on me, but I would like to get your insight on this question and see if there's any hope for extroverts going forward.
Sure. We'll talk about distributed work in particular. And something that you'll find interesting is that I did some research on using the big 5 personality tests on who does well in remote work versus in office work. And we clearly see that introverts perform better in a remote work environment compared to extroverts. Probably not huge news, but that applies to introverted leaders and extrovert leaders, as well as not leaders, rank and file, perform better. So we see higher performance for people who are introverted when they are working remotely, not distracted, and focus more than extroverted people who are, for them, it's more of a struggle to work remotely. They get more drained. So that's very clear. Other factors from the big 5 personality tests is that people who are conscientious perform better when they're working remotely. People who are less conscientious perform less well remotely. They, by comparison, do better in the office. So those are just some interesting facts from the big 5 personality test on who does better when they're working in a remote environment versus when they're working in an in-person environment. That's some factual data. And that is something to consider for people, what kind of personalities they have. So if they have an extroverted personality, they might benefit from more time in person. When they have an introverted personality, maybe more time spent working remotely. Then more broad, that speaks to the fact that our world is becoming more and more remote compared to before the pandemic. Right now, it's definitely a more remote world. We had something like 5% more work being worked remotely before the pandemic, and now it's like 25% of all work. That implies that, of course, compared to what was happening before the pandemic, managers who are introverted have more of an advantage because they're more capable of working effectively in a remote modality and more capable of managing the people in a remote modality.
I saw that Sophie Wade is indicated she's more of an ambient. I thought that was a drug that people took, but
ambivert.
Yeah. So do we want to? I guess the suggestion would be if you're really an extrovert, you might want to do some behavioral modification working in the new hybrid workplace. Is that a safe statement or not?
Yes, and you want to make sure that you take on some aspects of introversion, which is kind of funny that previously introverts were asked to act more extroverted when they're in the office.
It was always the other way.
That's right.
This is very
so it's benefit to work to act on the introverted traits when you're working remotely.
Interesting. Okay, thank you, Gleb.
Sure.
Mark?
Gleb, different topic dimension. Mental health. Do you have a point of view on what, if any, effects the pandemic had on sort of the mental health of us as a society? And what's your point of view on the potential long-term effects, positive or negative, with regards to employee mental health in conjunction with hybrid work policies?
Well, very clearly see that employees have better mental health when they have the flexibility to work remotely. There's no question about that. So the large majorities report that the ability to work remotely, part-time or full-time, allows them to have less stress, better well-being, less burnout. A concern is with people who are extroverted. So going back to the previous question, the people who are extroverted, and especially if they live by themselves, they tend to experience more feelings of isolation and loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a concern in terms of mental health for people working remotely. But introverts don't have as much of that as and extroverts who don't live by themselves have that. But there is definitely some isolation as a concern for that specific demographic. We also have a concern about people disconnecting, and that has to do with management. So when managers set a bad example and put pressure on their employees to be always available, that is a problem. That people feel too connected outside of their work hours. They feel pressure to work outside of their work hours. They work too long, that can lead to burnout. But if you set normal expectations, appropriate expectations, if you model those, if you don't send messages outside of work time, if you're working outside of work time, that's great. But just schedule your message to go out in the morning. Easy enough to do in email, Microsoft Teams, Slack, whatever you want to do. So not put pressure on people. Overall, very, very clear that people have mental health benefits from working remotely. Now, this is not simply me saying this, and this is not simply research. There's also the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has come out with very clear guidance around mental health and remote work. According to the EEOC, mental health is a valid reason for people to work remotely from a ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act perspective. So if people request the ability to work remotely for anxiety or depression or whatever situation, it's incumbent on employers to allow them to work remotely. If they don't, it would be a violation of the ADA. Now, you can go and you can try to investigate whether the person actually has anxiety or has depression, and then they can go to a therapist and so on. But I generally advise my employees to not really get into that. They don't want to spend their time investigating employees, what employees are saying about their mental health experiences. But this is a very important legal issue that's coming up. Recently, companies have been investigated and fined and people have been reinstated for not treating AJ appropriately, including with mental health concerns. This is definitely something that people need to be aware of. Employers need to be aware of and manage appropriately.
Gleb, you've got a unique vantage point in all the work that you do and the research that you produce, but also consume. Who do you see as the gold standard companies in terms of how they have implemented hybrid work?
I think Atlassian is probably a great company to look at. And I do have a conflict of interest at a client of mine, but because they're a client of mine, I've seen them internally, what they are doing. And so I think they're doing it really well. They have employees who work remotely in a very flexible modality, and where teams are coming in on a flexible basis, with teams making a decision on when to come in. They come in something like maybe once a quarter, they're funded to come into the office, they can do that. So that's very helpful. And then they have various activities and gatherings. Right now, we're working with them on supporting the junior staff through various programs and learning programs. So that's a really great company. Another company, and Atlassian is quite public. Another company that's less public about it, but is doing a great job, is Booz Allen Hamilton. It's a major consulting firm, and I've worked with them as well. So they also have this team level modality. The team decides on when they're coming to the office, and of course they need to accommodate their clients, so they do that. But this is another company that's doing really well on remote work and hybrid work. So those are two companies I would name that are really exemplary. GitHub is another one doing quite well, so I see them as quite successful. For a company that's outside of those professional services, Nationwide Insurance is doing quite well. So again, a lot of flexibility. Teams decide when they come in. That's another company. So there's a number of companies that are doing really well in the sphere.
Gleb, isn't GitHub totally remote?
GitHub, yeah.
So they're not
Totally
hybrid
remote.
at all. They're not hybrid.
Correct. They're not hybrid.
Well, they're actually introducing, for the first time ever, they're introducing Workspace on Demand into the mix. So
Well, because you called them. I probably
I think I have a conflict of interest on that one. A positive.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good luck.
Gleb, this has been just fantastic. You've given us a masterclass. So bravo to you. We've run out of time. I've got one last question to ask you, but before we get to that, if somebody watching you today, listening to you today, would like to catch up on some of your social media or perhaps engage with you directly, how would they do that?
One good way is to connect with me on LinkedIn and tell me that you heard me on the What's Your Work Fit show. I wouldn't accept your request otherwise because I get a lot of people who are extending connection requests to me for a variety of reasons. So tell me you show me on the What's Your Work Fit show, and I'll be glad to accept your request. So check that out. Then just check out my website, disasteravoidanceexperts.com.
Right.
Disasteravoidanceexperts.com, that has a lot of information about my books. I mentioned the book on Amazon that you can get on Kindle, audiobook, or paperbook, Returning to the Office and Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams. Also, a lot of information about my other books. For example, ChatGPT for Thought Leaders and Content Creators. If you're curious about generative AI, 5 other books. And of course, it has information about my consulting and training, which is how I do spend most of my time.
I hope we can get you back on sometime during this calendar year, because I have a feeling our assumptions about generative AI and how it impacts workplace creativity is going to be changed considerably. So
Happy to.
that would be great. Okay, let's get to our question. This is one we ask every guest, and that is, what's your work fit? What attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes work a wonderful part of your day, Gleb, doing many wonderful and meaningful things and not the all-consuming time suck of a day? What's your work fit?
Probably the fact that I work together with my wife. So
Nice.
she is the co-partner of my business. So I do the consulting and training. She does the back-end operations, and we have a few people working for us. But we are a team. So I get to the front end, she does the back end, and it's very, very exciting and engaging to work with her, collaborate, and just do this whole project together. So that's something that's really great for me in my work.
I think you've created a lot of envy out there in the audience who think about working with their spousal members and say, well, I don't know, I don't think so. I'm like you. I work with my wife on her business, and she does the front end. I do the back end. So that's good to know I'm not alone there.
No.
Thank you so much, Gleb. It's an absolute pleasure. And we three look forward to having you back on What's Your Work Fit at a future point this year. Thank you so much.
Great
Thank
show.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.